One of my favorite things about Twitter is how often it seems to recommend me things that I would fawn over. In terms of AAA releases, I haven't really been on top of them that much, opting more into playing indies and older titles. They just don't align with my interests, so I don't force myself on them. Yeah, it's nice to have a good AAA game, but expectations really lead to the big letdowns of the year feeling much more impactful than it would have otherwise. Finding in media is hard, but some of the best ways to tell if you like something is just by looking at it. Twitter is a beautiful place for devs to share what they've been working on. Luckily, my For You page will just throw games that seem really cool to me and then end up on my radar. Last year, I found out about Pizza Tower because of Twitter, which ended up turning into my favorite platformer of all time, alongside the best game I played last year. Once again, thanks to Twitter, I have found my first Game of the Year contender. That game being Go Mecha Ball, a twin-stick action shooter with roguelike elements. The game is more action and less rogue, which might turn some people off. However, this game shows how that might not be a bad thing. It describes itself as an audio-visual journey. I can attest between the audio design, flashy visuals, and intuitive controls, the game has a proper cadence that an audio-visual journey should have. This game sounds really, really, really good. It pushes the already great game feel from being great to being amazing. Something that really turns me off of a lot of indies is its sound design. Very often I'll pick up a game and doing things in said game doesn't sound that great. Atomic Crops doesn't feel that great to play. Moving the character feels like you're controlling a virtual character, and firing your weapon doesn't have the reaction you would want when firing a weapon. Weapons don't react, but instead just end up creating a moving projectile from the end of its barrel. I understand the difficulty of making good combat, but I think a good way of hiding the weak parts of your combat system is by making it sound really good to participate in that combat system. Visuals also help this, but I honestly think that having good sound design is enough to make players think that something plays better than it actually does. Atomic Crops doesn't sound good. If you don't like the other systems Atomic Crops has to offer, then the game becomes almost unplayable for certain people, including someone like me. I enjoy roguelike mechanics, but they can't carry me. If you're making a roguelike action game, then the action game part of that should be really fun, since it's the main system players will interact with at all times to get players invested into the roguelike mechanics. Cult of the Lamb is a pretty similar case. It's half roguelike dungeon crawler, half city builder. When I played Cult of the Lamb, I realized from the beginning that I did not like the dungeon crawler elements in the game. I enjoyed the city builder part, but the game is so 50-50 on these mechanics that it was enough for me to just drop the game. It had nothing to do with the quality of the dungeon crawler half, I just didn't enjoy it. I think Cult of the Lamb is a well-made game on both ends, whereas I feel Atomic Crops combat half is pretty lack. With Go Mecha Ball, a big thing players will notice is how bare its roguelike mechanics really are. To properly explain that, I feel now is the right time to tell you how the game is laid out. You first pick your character before starting a run. Once you've done that, you're dropped into the first level. You fight through 3 rounds of enemies and are then presented a portal that you have to go through, signifying that you've finished that arena. Once you've entered, you are presented with a choice of upgrade. After that, you are sent to the next arena and then repeat the process. You do this 3 times and then are sent to the shop where you can use credits you've been earning throughout your run before going and finding the level's boss. Once you beat the boss, you are then sent to the next biome and repeat. There are 4 levels in the game, with the 4th boss marking the end of the run. The game offers players weapons, upgrades, and abilities, which is where the roguelike mechanics come in. At any point when killing enemies, there is a chance of them dropping any random weapon. Upgrades and abilities are offered to players at random after they beat a level, and the shop has a chance to offer any item including health and ammo. At first, you're limited to a certain amount of utility, with the rest requiring players to unlock them through pachinko machines available at the beginning of a run. However, the game doesn't make the later upgrades essential to progressing in the game. The game is completely skill-based, meaning that if players don't unlock anything during their playthrough, they can still be successful in combat. Similar to Sifu, Go Mecha Ball uses its roguelike status as a way to encourage mastery and experimentation in its combat system. Sifu presents players with a challenging combat puzzle and designs its campaign around the idea that players have a full understanding of how the game works, allowing them to take full advantage of their combat system from the very start. A game like Hades is pretty 50-50 on this. If you don't have a good understanding of the combat puzzle, then you're going to have a pretty hard time, but even when you've learned the combat puzzle, you still need other skills and tools to progress properly. The upgrades you get with Darkness are essential for survival and feel required to get past certain milestones in the game. Not just that, but a good understanding on build crafting and adapting your playstyle to fit said build is also required. If you haven't built up Zagreus properly before reaching Hades, and you don't know how to perform properly with the build you've made, then you're not going to do that well. Go Mecha Ball's approach on roguelike design becomes much more obvious once you've taken a look at the unlockable utility items. It's very rare that you unlock new utility and realize that you have just unlocked a blatant upgrade from what you had access to before. Most of Go Mecha Ball's items are designed as options rather than upgrades for the player. You do eventually unlock game-breaking utility, but this doesn't end up happening until the very end of the game, where you mostly have everything unlocked already. In Hades, the reason it's so replayable is due to how much build variety is in the game. You have a ton of weapons, each with unique aspects and a charm that all serve as the foundation of your build. Not just that, but the Pact of Punishment makes it where the game just escalates in difficulty, making it very easy to get sucked in with how differently you could play the game run to run. In Go Mecha Ball, replayability doesn't come from build variety and the amount of builds you can make. Rather, it comes from pure fun of the game, and the variety that different utility can offer you. In terms of replayability, I think the game isn't that great. It took me 20 hours to finish everything the game has to offer, leaving me with only 3 achievements left to do. However, for what the game is going for, I don't think its lack of designed replayability is a bad thing. The game's combat puzzle is so fun and thrilling once mastered that not having incentives to keep playing doesn't really bother me. I will come back to play this game every now and then, for a run or two, because the game is just that fun. The selectable characters alleviate this issue quite a bit, since each one of them have their own unique playstyle. Cat Rascal being the all-rounder, allowing for a more freeform approach, while the other 3 have very clearly outlined playstyles. For example, let's compare 2 of my favorite characters, Proton and Mecha. Proton has maxed out collision and HP, while being given the upgrade that resets your boost cooldown if you've gotten a kill with it. He's also the slowest character in the game, making dodging and weaving with basic movement much harder. This is balanced out by his large health pool. Proton's game plan revolves around getting enemies down to a certain amount of health, and then killing them with the boost to reset your cooldown and repeat. In practice, this game loop becomes much more freeform, but this is the outlined playstyle. None of these characters force you to act a certain way with them. Mecha is the complete opposite. Mecha has middling collision, ability, and the lowest starting pool of health in the game. In return, he's given maxed out weapon damage alongside one of the best weapons in the game, the Scrambler. I think the most important thing to set Mecha apart are the Scrambler and their movement speed. The Scrambler is a shotgun that fires ricocheting bullets. Hitting an enemy, the bullets will ricochet into any nearby enemies, and shooting at walls will cause the bullets to home at any nearby enemies as well. Alongside the higher weapon damage values, you end up getting very far with just a starting weapon. So much so that dropping it for something else feels like the player is actively choosing to make the game harder for themselves. His movement speed also helps define his playstyle greatly. His ball form isn't what's impressive. In terms of speed, I think he moves a bit slower than Cat Rascal. Mecha's impressive speed comes from his standard form, with Mecha having the fastest walk speed in the game, allowing for them to dodge around projectiles and enemies without going into ball form. The reason this is such an integral factor of their kit is due to the fact that you cannot shoot while in ball form. Giving Mecha a really fast walk speed allows players to play much more aggressively with their weapons than they would have otherwise. A character like Proton spends a lot of time in their ball form since they can't really afford to walk around normally due to their slow walk speed. Mecha is the only character who has this luxury, allowing them to engage much less in ball form than any other character would. Cat Rascal is the all-rounder in the game, allowing for the 3 other characters to have a much more designed gameplay approach. This allows for an immediate sense of variety when you start a run, since choosing a character that isn't Cat Rascal will determine what playstyle you engage with for that run. What we're seeing right now is a deviation of roguelike mechanics from what they were initially created to serve. For years, most roguelikes have followed the usual tropes on what is needed to make a good roguelike. You need a ton of weapons, different level layouts, a bunch of bosses. You need to be able to go through 2 different runs back to back without seeing the same content. I've noticed that more devs are just taking the death mechanic from roguelikes without taking the other tropes into their games. Go Mecha Ball doesn't have enough level variety. It doesn't have enough utility. There isn't enough weapons. There isn't enough variety that a roguelike should have. Instead, the game presents a challenging combat puzzle and uses its death mechanic as a way to encourage mastery. Where in Hades I'm playing to discover more of the story and try out different builds, in Go Mecha Ball I'm playing with the sole purpose of getting better at the combat so I can eventually finish a run. Go Mecha Ball has handcrafted their levels and it shows. These are extremely well-made levels, with each of them presenting their own unique yet similar mechanics. The one common denominator between all the level mechanics comes from their focus on movement. Level 1 has boost ramps that give you a boost in its projected direction, Level 2 has pinball bumpers that propel you in the opposite direction, while Level 3 has fans that slowly levitate you into the air. Each of these, when interacted with, will give you the same effect that using a boost would. The reason these mechanics work so well is exclusively due to the way the boost is designed. Boost is the integral mechanic that the entire game is built around. Boost serves as 3 mechanics. It's an ammo source, a way to deny enemies, and a dodge mechanic. Enemies will flash an exclamation mark above their heads, marking them open for denial. If you boost into them during this phase, you will deny them, meaning that their attack timer will reset, giving you more time to attack them without any threat for a short time. Boosting is on a 2-second timer, but ends up feeling much longer in practice. You use boost for so many things so often that you feel limited at times. This ends up making the level mechanics much stronger and incentivizes their use much more often. When you interact with any level mechanic, they will invoke the same effect that a boost does, meaning that anything you can achieve from hitting enemies with a boost can be achieved by using the level mechanics. Boost on its own is a very strong tool, but with its cooldown being as long as it is, level mechanics and their importance of their presence becomes equally as important. Enemy density and variety in each arena pushes this to its limits. If you're not constantly using level mechanics, you're going to end up having a harder time and a less enjoyable time as well. Arena design needs to be aggressive enough to encourage and reward players for using their mechanics, and Go Mega Ball does this in two ways. Its enemy density and its enemy design. There are a lot of enemies in Go Mega Ball, but there are two classes of enemies, light and heavy. The difference is light can be denied while heavy can't. Light enemies present direct damage to you, while heavy enemies present areas of damage that lights cannot produce in the same way. Heavies usually have large attacks that take up a lot of space, and if the player is under the pressure of light enemies, they're essentially forced into using boosts to get out of that pressure. Not only does this encourage the use of level mechanics during a cooldown, but it also encourages players to use the level mechanics as a tool for defense, or vice versa even. For almost the entire run of the game, the player is dealt a perfect mixture of enemy variety and enemy density to allow for heavy use of both the boost and level mechanics constantly for every encounter they face. After a time, it'll end up feeling like a part of the player's kit since it becomes such an essential tool. This extends to the boss fights as well. They have both deniable and undeniable, while having their level mechanics littered around the arena. It's a great test of your boost management, since you'll have to respond quickly and accordingly to whatever moves the bosses puts out to determine whether you need to boost into them or boost away from them. Each boss has a good twist that keeps you on your toes. They have the same philosophy of mixing and matching deniable and undeniable attacks, but they also have their own unique mechanics to keep things fresh. All this serves to encourage heavy use of both boost and level mechanics, giving players a hard time for not using them. The game pushes its systems just far enough into the endgame that going any further would make the game unbalanced. The game will put you against more enemies, they become even more aggressive, they do more damage, bosses become more aggressive and have more mechanics, and boost is needed more often and serves more functions. The game gives you more things to balance and more enemies to manage, and forces you into using your strongest tools as often as possible. By the end, it's genius. The game isn't so hard that players feel discouraged from experimenting, it pushes players just enough to force them to use all the fun stuff. Not only does forcing players to use these powerful tools make players have fun, but the actual feeling you get from using these tools is amazing. The game doesn't sacrifice its vision for a combat puzzle by catering to the roguelike mechanic aspects of the game, but also delivers just enough where repetition is softened. The game is replayable, just not in the same way something like Hades is. The game has been built to be as fun as possible, as to encourage players to keep going back to it rather than creating a bunch of content and items to get players to stay. The game just feels incredible to play. It's one of the best feeling indie games I've ever played, and will probably be the thing that hooks most people into it. Go Mecha Ball has properly cemented itself as my game of the year, as of February 4th at least. The sound design, visuals, game feel, and captivating combat puzzle have been honed down to perfection, and have produced a game worthy of being called an audio-visual journey. Time will tell whether this game has the impact it deserves. This is AAA game feel. This is AAA quality sound design, and the game design is comparable to something akin to Doom Eternal. This is a fantastic game that I recommend to anyone who's made it this far. I expected the game to be a fun showcase of game feel and audio design, but it ended up being much more than that, and I couldn't be happier.